What's going on, everybody? Nick here, and welcome to another episode here on the channel where we are finally starting to get this motor back into the SS. I was able to pick up the motor from John at Master Machines over in Salem, New Jersey. He was the one who was doing all of the engine work for the car. And I brought it over to Mark so we can get started with putting it back together. As you can see from the photos, John did everything you could possibly do to this motor. He stripped it completely down. He then thoroughly cleaned everything. He checked the crank to make sure it is straight, which of course it was. He polished that. And then of course he started installing all of the engine internals. If you didn't see that first video, that consisted of the Wiseco forged pistons, as well as the ZZP4340 connecting rods. Once he finished the block, he then took care of the head. That's where he installed the ZZP Stage 2 LDK LHU cams, as well as the SuperTech 94-pound dual springs and retainers. And then, of course, he put it all together with the ARP head stud kit. So the first thing we had to do is we had to put both chains back on the motor. It may seem overwhelming, but it's a lot easier than you think, especially if you search on YouTube. You can find some videos on how to disassemble and reassemble both chains. Makes it very easy to do. Once we got all of that figured out, we installed a new gasket, a new plate, and then we put the motor back on the cradle. Once it was back on the cradle, we started reinstalling all of those components that we had to put back on the motor. This included our starter, our alternator, our AC condenser, the Opal fuel rail and injectors, the intake manifold, the exhaust manifold, the intake and exhaust solenoids, new spark plugs, and of course the coil pack. Finally, we wrapped it up by installing the ATI super damper. Pretty easy to do, it just presses into place. And then it was time for some fun. This is where we had to start connecting and configuring the new turbo to the engine.
Installing the adapter for the return. We're using brass, not to hurt the aluminum. The ring has been lubed. Seated in there. Okay. Face the clamp towards the transmission and access with a long screwdriver.
We have our actuator. This is the Tile 44 MVR, which will be connected to a dump tube. Now, one thing Mark just noticed as he's installing the dump tube to the actuator, dump tube is pretty long for the automatic. So we just had the car lowered to make sure all of this would fit. He made a mark on the heat shield up here, so we know where it's got to be cut. He also made a mark here on the tube. So you can see a few inches down from the ZZP logo, that's where we have to cut it. That's where we know it's going to clear, and we're not going to run into any issues. What you playing now?
Huh?
He's taking a game break.
Yo, oh!
What?
Get over here and tighten these turbo bolts up then. Get that midget 13. Tighten the bottom one and this back one. Keep the light.
One thing you have to do, if you're going to go with this 257 SXZ, you have to make sure that you clock this turbo because it does not mount up to your exhaust manifold unless you loosen these bolts to clock it so it fits in place like the old one did. The other thing you have to make sure you do, you have to loosen these so you can clock the center housing. Make sure that your oil feed line is actually facing up top. Now the one thing with the ZZP oil kit is that you get the fitting to go into the block, you get this hose, you get this fitting here which you attach to your turbo, and you get the return line and all the fittings for that. What they don't give you, however, is the fitting for the oil send.
Fitting?
Yeah.
4 A&N to 3/8 pipe.
Yeah. So what you have here is you have 4 A&N to 3/8 pipe attaches here, which allows us to attach this line right to it. That'll send the oil to the turbo, and then we dump it, it goes back into the block there.
Put this in your video. That line will need this.
That's very important too. Like Mark said, this line, because it's so close to everything, is going to need
Even though
the
it's
heat
braided.
shield. Even though it's braided and it's got coating and everything, you are next to a dump tube, you are next to the exhaust manifold.
This, even though this is braided hose, you're still going to want to cover it with that. This has got to go into.
So we're gonna get going with that and then we'll come back. So here's what we gotta do. We're making up some lines, aka Mark's making up lines while Pete plays a game.
I made the lines up.
So what we did is we removed the original coolant banjo bolt and we went with the vibrant one because we're gonna have more flow with that.
I say the vibrator one.
The vibrator one, it vibrates for your pleasure. So this is what we went with. 6AN male, banjo. See all the info there. Connects here. What we had to do is we had to get an adapter to reduce it down to a AN4
This is just a
fitting.
blow off.
Oh, okay, so you don't have
See that line now runs
Gotcha.
to the actuator. So the actuator is water cooled. And then the other end goes from there back down there. Actuator's water cooled, turbo's oil cooled. Once we get all that done, we got to figure out the intake itself for the. All right, so we got the water lines hooked up. So one thing, bigger turbo, bigger opening. ZZP air intake, tiny opening. So what we did is we went to frozen boost. We got 3.5-inch coupler, and then we had to join it to a 90-degree bend because they unfortunately don't make this as one solid piece. So there's actually, as you can see here, there is a metal joiner where you join two silicone pieces together, clamp everything in, and now you have a piece that replaces the one that came from ZZP that connects to a stock KO4 turbo. Now the next step we have to do is figure out the rest of it. There is another silicone piece, which I can grab. So here is the other original piece from ZZP. It's supposed to connect here, so then you can connect the aluminum pipe that came with it to go over to the front for your air filter. Unfortunately, that's not going to work because this is too small. Frozen Boost does not make adapters to go from 3.5 to this. So what we're going to do next is once we get this into the car, we're going to replace this with a straight pipe, straight metal pipe, so then we don't have to worry about it. But for those of you who are saying you have to throw away your ZZP cold air intakes for a bigger turbo, no you don't. You can find adapters and make it work.
So So out of here, into here, and then back in. Pete, you can put the bottom one in. Huh? Put the bottom one in. I only gave you a brand new blade. I gave you one with a handle, I want you to cut yourself.
Can you give me one more? Finish this up.
Yeah, give me that one back. I just put my shit away.
Got to put a new blade on there anyway.
Why? Come here. What's this thing on?
Probably. Well, it might not work actually.
Yeah, where's that clamp? I think this does work.
You always go to I need a bigger clamp. I think it's big enough.
We're gonna have to get another one anyway, so.
Was that clamp for this or?
No, that clamp is different. Here.
It was for the smaller side. So just to show you what we did,
That's open? That's too big. Well, this one.
this is from Mark's race car. That black pipe is connected to this at one point, which he no longer uses.
Come on, stop f***ing around.
There, what does it work, Nicky?
So we need here.
So we're just gonna see if this works, which it looks like it will. And then over the winter, when the car is not being run, just get this powder coated. So, cradle's back in. We have downpipe connected. We have the dump tube connected as well. We had to do a little bit of massaging and finagling to make sure that would fit and clear our downpipe, which is now connected. We have the wideband O2. We have a bung for it. We put a plug, so if I want to run a wideband O2 gauge later on, easy to do. Downstream O2, upstream O2 will be up there, but it's coming along. So as you can see, we are not quite completed with this whole process yet, but we are extremely close to it. We figured out a way to make sure we can use some of the components from the ZZP HHR air intake, so I can run an air intake on this new turbo. Once we get that all figured out, we'll double check, make sure all of our vacuum lines are correct, all of our fittings are good to go, and then it's time to put oil in it, install the new tune that Matt from ZZP gave to me, and start it up. So if you haven't already, make sure you hit the subscribe button as well as the bell notification so you get notified as soon as I upload that video of us starting the car and finishing it up. And of course, make sure you follow me on Instagram so you can get a behind the scenes and see some of this content and footage before anybody else does. Till next time, see you later.
Him to push it over that way so I can line this one up.
You do that, Skippy.
Throw his glasses, his pens.
Oh, I think I just fucking leaked in my pants. Damn it.